Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Apologies for yesterday, but I was actually at a Moody's Investor Services conference where we partnered with them for their fourth East African Summit here at the Kapinski. Moses kindly took a photograph and kindly complimented me, saying it was a very good function, and indeed it was. Lots of detail, lots of granularity, and lots of insights as to what's going on. We'll be putting up the presentations today, and then I'll tap out the links for everybody to take a look at. It was quite a long day, because I then went on to Larry Madoa's show, which is called Sidebar, in the evening, and enjoyed that too, and I'd like to thank Larry for that. Oil was all over the place yesterday, fell about 4% at one point, and then bounced back, and we're now at $45.75 in the US. I still think we're headed down to about $32, and a lot of the analysts are now talking it lower, so I think the conditions for that down move are being set, and you can see that in the extreme volatility that we've been seeing lately. German 10-year yields trade at critical levels as 0.5% looms. This is Holger, 0.5%. Imagine that. I mean, that's clearly artificial, isn't it, if you think about it? And therefore, the adjustment will happen. At the moment, it's happening in an orderly manner. Bond bubble continues to deflate. Japanese 10-year yields rise to 0.1%, first time since February, and you can see how 10-year yields have been on the up. And that goes back to something I wrote in September 2016, mirrors on the ceiling, the pink champagne on ice. Home thoughts, I'm reading Divisadero, which is a book by Michael Ondaatje, and enjoying it very much. And let me give you some quotations. For we live with those retrievals from childhood that coalesce and echo throughout our lives, the way shattered pieces of glass in a kaleidoscope reappear in new forms, and are song-like in their refrains and rhymes, making up a single monologue. We live permanently in the recurrence of our own stories, whatever story we tell. As if this collection of things is what she is, so we fall in love with ghosts. And then I come from Divisadero, street Divisadero, from the Spanish word for division, the street that at one time was the dividing line between San Francisco and the fields of Presidio. Or it might be derived from the word divisar, meaning to gaze at something from a distance. There is a height nearby called El Divisadero, thus a point from which you can look far into the distance. Like this photograph, zap, lightning and fireworks at the same time last night in Fairmont, Minnesota. Photo courtesy of Carissa Ricard. Oh, the world over there, it's so hard to explain, just like a dream's got lost in your brain. Thomas Pynchon from Gravity's Rainbow, and the reason Gravity's Rainbow is on my mind is because it's all about rockets. Well, in part. And then information, what's wrong with dope and women? Is it any wonder the world's gone insane with information come to be the only real medium of exchange? The silences here are retreats of sound, like the retreat of the surf before a tidal wave, sound draining away down slopes of acoustic passage to gather someplace else, to a great surge of noise. Thomas Pynchon. US diplomats fear Trump will get outfoxed and outplayed by Putin in their first meeting. If Putin likes Donald Trump, I consider that an asset, not a liability, the incoming US president said at a January 11 press conference. Shortly before taking office on Friday, he'll get the chance to test that when he meets the Russian president for the first time at the G20 summit in Germany. Putin, as I've written in October 2015, is a geopolitical grandmaster, and in December 2016 I spoke about how he had interfered in the US election, and I said we have a deviated tomahawk, which is a quote from Don DeLillo. US diplomats fear Trump will get outfoxed and outplayed by Putin in their first meeting. Trump's romance with China's Xi has cooled, ass-kicking could lie ahead, apparently. Shell predicted Trump would make one final pass at China's leader in Hamburg. I think this is the last flight out for Xi, but it was an offer Xi was likely to decline. They are such a deeply conservative regime that they have a very difficult time imagining real paradigm shifts and really perceiving how the world has changed and where new convergences of common interests actually lie, a la Kissinger. Moon warned Kim Jong Un not to cross the red line, but it's unclear where that red line is. And of course, Kim Jong Un has been firing off rockets, and the latest one obviously has alarmed everybody. And the quote from Thomas Pynchon, Gravity's Rainbow, is, "But it is a curve each of them feels unmistakably. It is the parabola." They must have guessed once or twice, guessed and refused to believe that everything always collectively had been moving toward that purified shape latent in the sky. The shape of no surprise, no second chance, no return, yet they do move forever under it, reserved for its own black and white bad news, certainly as if it were the rainbow and they its children. See why it's been uppermost in my mind, and I somehow imagine Kim Jong-un reading Thomas Pynchon's Gravity's Rainbow as he makes his decision to fire off his rockets. Al Thani, this is the Emir of Qatar, obviously remains in the crosshairs of his erstwhile GCC allies. I wrote about this in June 2017 when I spoke about rolling over Qatar. And actually, regime change seems to me to be uppermost on these folks' minds. And as the oil price falls, the idea is going to be much more attractive, isn't it? That you can grab your hands on $335 billion of reserves in one fell swoop. Africa's demography is not its destiny, says Bloomberg View. By 2050, more than 1/4 of the world's population will live in Africa, up from about 1/6 today. Even if these projections are slightly off, that fact should serve as a call to action for a continent whose long-term promise is equaled by wide-ranging perils. Although fertility rates have been dropping across Africa, the populations of 26 of its countries are expected to at least double by 2050. Sub-Saharan Africa's cohort of youths aged 15 to 24 seekers of education and jobs is growing far faster than the same cohorts in Latin America and in Asia. Bloomberg View again, militarizing aid to African nations to fight terrorism and bribing them to block migrants won't help to stabilize their populations or economies. Neither will turning a blind eye to corruption and human rights abuses in order to exploit their mineral resources. The UN statisticians would be the first to admit that their projections are just that. Ultimately, Africa's destiny is less a question of demography than of leadership, which I think is very fair, and I touched on this in 2014 when I was writing about Ouagadougou, and I said the African youth demographic, many characterize it as a demographic dividend, but for Blaise Compaoré it turned out to be a demographic terminator, and I said they are set to alter the existing equilibrium between the rulers and the subjects, and I said a rebalancing has already begun. Emmanuel Macron tweeted, Madame Veil, you threw in our lives that light which was in you. Very powerful. Nice photograph, actually. Let's move on to the currency markets. Euro dollar's doing some work here around 113.44. Dollar index 96.30. Japanese yen 113.18. Swiss franc 0.9653. The pound 129.44, picking up a little bit. Aussie dollar 0.7603. India rupee 64.775. South Korean won 11.57.54. The Real 328.82. Egyptian pound 17.89.87. And the South African rand 13.36.30. Dollar index, I think it's a little bit of a trading buy, but let's keep an eye on it. It's a bit tricky trading the dollar these days because you never know what Trump is going to say next. Euro dollar, I think it trades a little bit heavy, but it's right now at 113.45. Tesla shares tumble. This is according to Bloomberg. Tesla Inc. shares fell to the lowest in more than a month after the electric car maker reported flattening sales ahead of introducing a Model 3 sedan that buyers will still know little about. Shares of the company run by Elon Musk plunged as much as 5.6% Wednesday. Tesla reported more than 22,000 vehicle deliveries in the second quarter, down from 25,051 in the first 3 months of the year. While it is nice to see Tesla finally hitting a stated target on time, we question whether 30 vehicle deliveries essentially built by hand count as mass production, and we also are surprised that this mass market vehicle does not have official photos, options, pricing, or really any details available, said Jeff Osborne of Cowen & Co. Bitcoin to 50,000 is the latest call from a prolific stock picker. Bitcoin will double to $5,000 next year and reach 25,000 to 50,000 in the next decade. It is a testament to the exuberance around Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other blockchain assets that equity investors who hadn't been involved in cryptocurrencies are now starting to analyze and make bets on the sector, along with established Bitcoin enthusiasts who see long-term gains, even if they say there might be a correction after the recent rally. There are only 21 million Bitcoins in circulation, and the world will fight over those 21 million coins as confidence in currency and other investments deteriorates. Murrow, referring to the algorithm that caps the amount of Bitcoin that can be created, I have little doubt that 1% of the money in cash, bonds, stocks, and gold will end up in cryptocurrencies. Gold last trading at 1224.75. Kind of subdued. Futures, as I said, in New York rebounded 1.4% after falling 4.1% during Wednesday's trading session. I've got a crude oil target of $32 a barrel for WTI, sleepwalking into disaster Arab states to deliver a verdict on Qatar, as compromise is proving elusive. Have a look at the CDS spreads for Saudi, Qatar, and Dubai. Take a look at this global sugar prices from Bloomberg. Next, oil no longer has all emerging assets over a barrel. This is an interesting report on Bloomberg. It's not just emerging market stocks that have shed their umbilical link to oil and commodities. Bonds and currencies are also breaking free. Stocks in the developing world posted the best start to a year since 2009, even as oil capped its worst first half in 19 years. That's partly because the weight of energy companies in the benchmark index has already declined, while technology companies become the dominant industry group. The correlation between Bloomberg Emerging Market Local Sovereign Index and Brent crude reached minus 0.37, the most negative since October 2013. The relationship between MSCI Emerging Market Currency Index and the Bloomberg Commodity Index has slumped to minus 0.18. Venezuela's default risk is rising. The implied probability of the country missing a payment over the next 12 months rose to 56% in June. That's the highest level since December. The odds of a credit event over the next 5 years increased to 91% last month. Trading in Venezuela's dollar bonds was more volatile in June, with its benchmark $4 billion of notes June 2027 trading at $49.09. Yields rose to 21.6%. Whoa. And as I said in May, and I've said severally, Nicolas Maduro's Venezuela is at a breaking point. Other capitals are going to run out of options. Now, let's move on to Africa. Zambia's president seek parliamentary backing for state of emergencies. Edgar Lungu said on Wednesday he would seek Parliament's approval to impose a state of emergency after fire gutted the country's biggest market in what he said was politically motivated arson. Political tensions in Zambia, seen as one of Africa's more stable and functional democracies, have been rising since the arrest on treason charges of main opposition leader Hakainde Hichilema, who narrowly lost to Lungu in a bruising election last year. The country's last state of emergency was declared in 1997 by then-President Frederick Chiluba after an attempted coup. It was lifted the following year. Lungu said the fire, which destroyed the southern part of the city market and the capital Lusaka on Tuesday, bordered on economic sabotage and was aimed at making the country ungovernable. I have issued a statutory instrument proclaiming that a situation exists in this country which, if allowed to continue, may lead to a state of public emergency. The proclamation will be tabled in the National Assembly, he said in a televised address. This is not good at all, especially when it's such a closely run election and then you try and sort of alienate the other side. It tends, in my experience, not to work at all. But this approach seems to be the one that he's determined to take. South Africa's ANC said to propose that the central bank be state-owned. Proposed that the central bank should be wholly state-owned rather than an institution with private shareholders. The big fight will be about what is a fair price for the shares. Some of the shareholders will set up a big fight about that. This will be in and out of the courts forever because the Reserve Bank Act is silent on what happens in the case of nationalization. Traders were on edge after this statement came out and started to dump the rand. Rand fell as much as 2.2% before paring the drop to 1.9%, the worst performance amongst major emerging market currencies. South African oil shares up 3.61% this year, dollar versus rand coming up to that key level of 13.40. We blow through that, we're going to blow again big time up to 14. Egyptian pound 17.8987, Nigerian all share up 20.2% year to date, Ghana Stock Exchange Composite Index up 16.86% year to date. Tanzanian Parliament enacts resources law castigated by industry. Tanzania's Parliament enacted the third law this week to overhaul the country's natural resources industry. Provisions of the Written Laws Act include granting the government stakes of at least 16% in mining companies operating in Tanzania with the option to acquire up to 50%. The nature, scale, and manner of the recent changes have spooked the mining community. I'm sure they have. With the relationship between the mining community and government already strained, the latest bills have fueled uncertainty and added to a growing list of investor concerns. The Tanzanian Chamber of Minerals and Energy had warned in a submission to Parliament that the legislation would make Tanzania an attractive destination for mining investment. Proposed legislation isn't providing sufficient rights, nor the framework shareholders and investors expect when investing in the exploration and production sector. The Oil and Gas Association of Tanzania said in a letter sent to lawmakers before they began debating the legislation, I imagine there are no politicians in Tanzania able to argue the other side with the President, John Bulldozer Magufuli. And this is very alarming, actually. Rwanda's Kagame rebukes Western diplomats over elections, while the EU in particular, VTB, which got into all that trouble in Mozambique, is discussing the possibility with the government of the DRC of issuing a Eurobond. put up a photograph from VTB. Killing Without Consequence is an article in Human Rights Watch about what's been happening in Central African Republic. It is not surprising that violence continues because the message is clear. You can kill without consequence. Risks slanted to the downside in sub-Saharan Africa, said Moody's yesterday. We'll get all those presentations up imminently. Kenya's private sector declines to a record low in June, according to Standard Bank. Kenyan private sector activity signaled a solid deterioration in the month of June, occasioned by a fall in output as new orders remained the same. The Purchasing Managers Index survey released by Stanbic and HIS Market has shown output contracts at solid pace, new orders growth slows to survey record low, purchasing activity and stocks fall for first time in survey history. Well, we've had the drought, we've had a slowdown in private sector credit growth, and we've got the election in front of us, which is all compounded to slow things down. All we want is a transparent election, clear winner, the loser to go down with grace, is what I said on Larry's show yesterday. Moody's, there's a link there, but that's just for what we'll put up the proper presentation in a little while. I was also saying that we live in a highly disruptive business environment today. Nairobi All Shares up 13.51% this year. We've had a good year, and the NSE 20 is up 12.01% this year, and that's had a good year as well. But I think it's time to be a little bit defensive, don't you?